Is Canada's real estate empire about to crumble? And will 2026 be the year that changes everything? Right now, across three major cities, Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary, a perfect storm is brewing. BC Premier David Eby is sounding the alarm bells, but is anyone really listening? The numbers don't lie, and what's happening behind closed doors is nothing short of catastrophic for homeowners, renters, and investors alike. This isn't just another housing market correction. This is a seismic shift that will determine the financial fate of millions of Canadians. We're about to dive deep into the panic gripping Vancouver, the cracks appearing in Toronto's foundation, and Calgary's unexpected role in this unfolding drama. We'll expose the numbers politicians don't want you to see, reveal the desperate measures being taken right now, and answer the burning question: which city will crash first? Don't miss a single detail of this crisis. Hit that subscribe button and smash the like button now, because this situation is escalating every single day, and you need to stay ahead of what's coming. David Eby isn't just concerned, he's in full crisis mode. The BC Premier has been scrambling, implementing emergency policies at a pace never seen before in Canadian politics. Why? Because Vancouver's housing market is teetering on a knife's edge, and he knows it. The average home price in Vancouver hit a staggering $1.2 million in late 2024, making it one of the most unaffordable cities on the planet. But here's what's truly terrifying. Inventory is surging while sales are plummeting. In January 2025, new listings jumped by 47% compared to the previous year, while actual transactions dropped by 23%. This is textbook market collapse territory. IBY recently declared we are facing an unprecedented housing crisis that threatens the very fabric of our communities. That's not political rhetoric. That's panic translated into official language. His government has rushed through legislation to increase supply. But developers are walking away from projects because the numbers simply don't work anymore. Construction starts in Greater Vancouver fell by 34% in Q4 2024, a number that should terrify every homeowner watching their equity evaporate. Subscribe right now because I'm about to reveal the critical numbers that mainstream media is completely ignoring. The condo market tells an even darker story. Pre-construction condo cancellations have skyrocketed, with major developers like Concord, Pacific, and Westbank pulling out of billion-dollar projects. Why? Because buyers can't afford them, and investors see the writing on the wall. Foreign investment, once the scapegoat for high prices, has dried up completely thanks to federal restrictions. Now Vancouver faces a homegrown crisis with no external villains to blame. Interest rates have devastated affordability. Even with recent cuts, mortgage payments for an average Vancouver home exceed $7,000 monthly. That's more than most families earn entirely. The math simply doesn't work. EBI's team knows that if prices drop 20 to 30%, thousands of recent buyers will be underwater on their mortgages, triggering a cascade of foreclosures that could bring down the entire provincial economy. While Vancouver makes headlines, Toronto's crisis unfolds in stealth mode. The city that once prided itself as Canada's financial powerhouse is watching its real estate empire crumble in slow motion. And the scariest part? Most people still don't see it coming. Toronto's average home price reached $1.1 million in early 2025. But scratch beneath the surface and you'll find something truly disturbing. Sales volume has collapsed by 38% year over year, the lowest numbers since 2009. That's not a slowdown. That's a market in cardiac arrest. Sellers are panicking, slashing prices by $100,000, $200,000, sometimes more, just to find a buyer. And still, homes sit empty for months. The condo market represents Toronto's Achilles heel. Over 70,000 new condo units are scheduled for completion between 2025 and 2026. 70,000. Where will the buyers come from? Immigration has slowed dramatically due to federal caps implemented in late 2024. International, students once reliable condo renters and buyers are being restricted. The rental market is already oversaturated, with vacancy rates climbing to 3.2%, the highest in a decade. Hit that like button now because we're getting into the critical information that will determine whether you protect or lose your wealth. Developers are in full retreat. Major projects in downtown Toronto have been quietly shelved. Insider sources reveal that financing for new developments has essentially frozen. Banks simply won't lend anymore because they see what's coming. One anonymous banking executive stated, We're preparing for the worst real estate correction in Canadian history. Toronto will be ground zero. The employment picture compounds the problem. Tech layoffs continue throughout 2025, with major companies downsizing their Toronto operations. Financial services, the city's backbone, are cutting thousands of positions as the economy weakens. These are the high-income earners who could afford million-dollar condos. Without them, who's buying? Commercial real estate adds another layer of catastrophe. Office vacancy rates in downtown Toronto have exploded past 18% as remote work becomes permanent. Converted office buildings flooding the residential market will add even more supply nobody wants. This perfect storm of oversupply and collapsing demand can only end one way. Prices must fall, and fall hard. Everyone's watching Vancouver and Toronto burn, but Calgary represents the most unpredictable element in this crisis. For years dismissed as a volatile oil town, Calgary suddenly finds itself in an enviable position. Or does it? Write your thoughts in the comments, because what I'm about to share next will blow your mind about Calgary's hidden vulnerabilities. The affordability advantage is disappearing fast. Calgary home prices jumped 15% in 2024, the fastest increase in Canada. That explosive growth isn't sustainable, especially as oil prices remain volatile and Alberta's economy faces uncertainty. Premier David Eby talks a big game about diversification. But the reality remains. Calgary's economy lives and dies with energy prices. Here's the critical factor nobody discusses. Calgary's boom is built entirely on refugee demand from Vancouver and Toronto. What happens when those markets crash? When Vancouver homes drop 30% and suddenly become affordable again, will those recent Calgary migrants rush back? The answer is probably yes, especially given that many still have family, jobs, and roots in BC and Ontario. Calgary's rental market already shows strain. Vacancy rates remain ultra-low at 1.4%, but thousands of new rental units are completing in 2025 and 2026. The city approved a record 18,000 housing starts in 2024, the most aggressive building boom in its history. This supply surge hits right as interprovincial migration could reverse. Calgary might avoid a crash in 2026, but it's not immune, it's just on a delayed fuse. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government continues pushing policies that demonstrate a fundamental disconnect from reality. Federal housing announcements promise billions for affordable housing. Yet the programs take years to produce results while the crisis explodes in real time. It's like using a garden hose on a 5-alarm fire. The immigration targets represent the biggest policy failure. After years of bringing in 500,000 plus newcomers annually inflating housing demand to absurd levels, Ottawa suddenly implemented dramatic cuts in late 2024. This whiplash policy creates the worst of both worlds. Years of excess demand followed by sudden collapse. Cities built infrastructure assuming continued immigration, and now they're stuck with oversupply nobody needs. Subscribe now, because the next section reveals the timeline for when each city will hit its breaking point in 2026. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem walks a tightrope, cutting interest rates to prevent economic catastrophe while inflation lurks in the shadows. But here's the dirty secret. Even with rate cuts, housing affordability remains abysmal. A 1% rate decrease on $1 million mortgage saves buyers about $500 monthly, not nearly enough when homes are overpriced by $300,000 or more. Federal politicians from all parties avoid the obvious truth. Canada built its economic growth model on a housing Ponzi scheme. Rising prices created wealth effects that drove consumer spending, propped up provincial revenues through land transfer taxes, and kept GDP growing. Now that model is collapsing, and nobody in Ottawa has a plan B. They're counting on a soft landing, but the numbers say we're headed for a hard crash. Let's cut through the speculation and look at what's actually going to happen. Based on current trajectories, here's the brutal timeline for 2026. Vancouver hits the wall first spring 2026. The city's toxic combination of maxed-out affordability, surging supply, and collapsing demand creates an impossible situation. Prices begin dropping 5 to 7% quarterly starting in Q1 2026. By summer, panic selling accelerates the decline to 25 to 30% from peak. Homeowners, who bought in 2021 to 2023 at inflated prices, face devastation. Toronto follows by mid-2026. The condo avalanche becomes undeniable as those 70,000 units complete. Rental rates collapse as landlords compete for tenants. Investor owners realize they're losing money every month and rush for the exits. Assignment sales flood the market as desperate buyers try escaping their pre-construction contracts. Toronto's decline will be slower than Vancouver's, but ultimately deeper, potentially 35 to 40% from peak by early 2027. Calgary remains stable through most of 2026, but cracks appear by year-end. The migration boom slows dramatically as Vancouver and Toronto become affordable again. Calgary's oversupply problem emerges in Q4 2026. Prices flatten, then begin a slow decline. Calgary avoids catastrophe but loses its momentum, a 10 to 15% correction by mid-2027. Seems likely. The ripple effects devastate the broader economy. Construction, employment collapses, taking hundreds of thousands of jobs with it. Provincial governments lose billions in land transfer tax revenue. Consumer spending craters as homeowners feel poorer. Banks face their worst crisis since 2008 as mortgage defaults climb. Retirement plans evaporate for millions who counted on home equity. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The saying goes, but this crisis breaks the mold. Every previous Canadian real estate correction had escape valves: lower interest rates, immigration surges, foreign investment, or economic growth. In 2026, all those escape valves are sealed shut. Interest rates can't go much lower without reigniting inflation. Immigration has been deliberately curtailed by federal policy. Foreign investment faces permanent restrictions. Economic growth is stalling as the global economy weakens. There's no cavalry coming to rescue overextended homeowners and speculative investors. Demographics make everything worse. Baby boomers need to downsize and sell, adding more supply to glutted markets. Millennials and Gen Z, crushed by student debt and low wages, can't afford to buy even with lower prices. The generational wealth transfer everyone predicted won't happen because that wealth is evaporating in the housing crash. Share your predictions in the comments. Can this process be stopped, or is there truly no turning back now? David Eby's panic isn't political theater, it's the rational response of someone who sees the cliff and can't stop the car. Toronto's leaders remain in denial, hoping the problem solves itself. Calgary's government celebrates its boom while ignoring the bust lurking around the corner. And Ottawa. They're still pretending this is manageable with modest policy tweaks. The truth is undeniable. 2026 will be remembered as the year Canada's housing bubble finally burst. 3 cities, 3 different timelines, 1 devastating outcome. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments right away. See you in the next video.